Андрей.
Hi, yes, I'm Andre, and I do Postgres,
Рекомендую заняться тем же самым.
and I recommend everyone to
Доклад
start
может
doing the
называться
same. My present,
«Видишь суслика?»
my presentation
Он
should have
есть.
been called "See a Weasel,"
Моя
but
основная работа
it's there,
— это развитие
following
Postgres
a
в
popular
интересах
Russian meme. My
для
main
всех, кто
work
делает информационные
is
системы.
about developing Postgres
Более
in the
специфично
interest
для
of everyone,
Яндекса, клиентов
everybody
Яндекса Cloud и
who
все
is
такое.
building information systems.
Вот. Но я не
As
безопасник.
applied to Yandex
Сегодня я
Clouds in
буду
the first
рассказывать
case. But I'm not a
про
security guy. I'm not
Элиса
going
и
to
Бад.
talk about Alice and
Ну и,
Bad.
соответственно,
And
мешки ворочать я сегодня тоже не собирался.
I
Так что,
was also not going
учитывайте,
to
что все рекомендации
do
все
heavy
являются
lifting today. So please consider
индивидуальными
that all
специальными
these
рекомендациями.
recommendations are
Сейчас в
personal
категории
advice
Postgres
rather than
примерно 128
investment
патчей.
ideas. So
Тоже
today
участвуют в
we
этом
have about
патче. У меня как
128
раз в смысле
patches that
юбилей.
I participate in it.
Я поддерживаю
So
всякие разные тулзы.
it's an
И
anniversary
это
for
делаю
them.
не я
I
один.
support all sorts of
Наша
tools, and I'm
команда,
not
которая
doing
в
it
основном
alone.
располагается в
This is our
Екатеринбурге,
team that is
мы
mostly
пишем Postgres.
located in
Когда я это говорю, мне
Yekaterinburg.
часто люди
We
говорят:
write
"О, у
Postgres.
вас,
When I
наверное,
say
свой
that,
форк Postgres".
they tell me quite
Мы
often,
начинаем
oh,
перечислять,
perhaps
и
you have your own
у нас не
Postgres
форк,
fork.
мы пишем
And
vanilla.
we're saying,
Вообще,
we're not a fork, we're writing vanilla.
форк — это слегка сломанный
So
Postgres.
there's an opinion that a
Но
fork is
часто
Postgres
авторы
a little bit
форков
broken.
упоминаются в коме-коде
A little
отдельно. Вот
bit,
тут достаточно
not a
вещи,
little
которые
bit,
не были
is about how
предупреждены.
often the
Это есть как раз
authors of Postgres
хотя, конечно,
are
встречаются интересные
mentioned.
технологии,
So basically,
которые
it's about the
просто
things that have been
быстро
accepted for the
засчитываются.
upstream.
Ну да ладно,
And
вас
that doesn't
нельзя
happen
долго говорить о
on its
безопасности. Я
own.
буду говорить
But
о безопасности
okay, our
как
conference
это
is about
база данных
security, and I'll
и
be talking
Postgres,
about
который в
security
базах
as it
данных
applies
разбирается.
to
Вот так.
databases and Postgres in
Проблемы
particular, because
интересуют
I don't have a lot of long knowledge in other databases and
Конечно же, мы
landscape.
строим информационную систему
Of course, we build an information
вводят люди
system
в ваш бэкэнд, и бэкэнд
into
вводит в
which
базу данных
people
все.
come from the
Вопросы
net,
безопасности до
they
базы
come to your
данных, да я вообще
backend,
там ничего не понимаю.
and
Вот. Но
ultimately
я
to the
знаю, что
database.
почти всегда
So I'm
злоумышленники
not
приходят в базу
sure I can tell you
из
anything
инъекции.
about
К сожалению,
database
бэкэнды приложения часто взламывают
security,
и
but
пытаются,
unfortunately,
как
people
я
who
занимаюсь
come
байтиками кодирования, пытаются
quite
байтики
often try
если не
to
украсть, то хотя
steal
бы
my
прослушать
data,
и
and if
воровать
not
что-нибудь еще из
stealing them,
системы.
at least doing something bad to
Если
them.
посмотреть на базу детальнее, то мы увидим, что база на самом деле
If
довольно
we take a
сложный
look
механизм.
at
Это
the
обычно кластер.
database in more
Кластер,
detail,
который
you'll see
состоит из
that it's a
нескольких
complicated
узлов.
mechanism. It's a
Каждый из них можно
cluster that
ломать, каждый
consists
из
of
них можно
several nodes,
шифровать,
each
каждый
of
может
which
украсть данные.
can
Массовый
be
вычислитель входит
broken,
поток
each of
данных в
which
аналитическую
can be
систему.
encrypted.
Допустим, ничего не буду говорить. Сейчас у нас есть какое-то резервное копирование. И
We
самая
have
главная часть, которая
some
из
backup
безопасности кластера,
copying.
которая меня
And the
беспокоит,
most
это то,
important
что кластера
part
очень
about
любят
the cluster
управлять
security
контрол-плейном.
is that
Если пользователь купил
servers
свой кластер и
control the
хитро
control
взломал,
plane. If
то
the
может
user
атаковать
has
контрол-плейн, а с
bought its
контрол-плейна
own
можно
cluster,
взломать
they can
базу
attack
данных.
the
Это
control
проблемка,
plane, and via the
поэтому
control
мы
plane, they can attack
не даем привилегий
adjacent
пользователю
databases. So this is a problem, and
в
that's why
Postgres,
we
что часто
don't
вызывает вопросы, потому что люди
offer
любят
super
пользоваться
user rights to
суперпользователями,
Postgres
любят разоружать базу во
users,
всех
which sometimes create problems
видах
because people
безопасности.
love using
Но даже
super
если
user
у
privileges.
пользователя нет,
But
раз
even if you
вассалы,
don't have a
властливые
super user,
служители,
we
они
get
часто
vulnerabilities
позволяют
perhaps
сделать
once a quarter.
эскалацию с
And quite often they
обычного
allow doing
пользователя
an
до
escalation
суперпользователя.
from
Поэтому
a
нужно
regular user to super
изучать и
user. So you
осознавать
need to
векторы
study them
атак.
in detail and understand that they
Самое интересное,
may
что
be
про
the
Postgres
source of
можно знать,
attacks.
можно узнать из
The
старых
most
книг.
interesting
Все-таки
thing that you can
Linux,
learn
в
about
частности, можно узнать,
Postgres
что
can be
теперь
known
Postgres
from the
год как
PG
сам
Announce
запускает себе устройство. Раньше
mailing
нам нужно
list,
было пойти
from which you might
в
have
Red Hat или какую-то
learned
еще организацию,
that
которая выдает для
Postgres
уязвимости. Теперь же в
assigns
2019
vulnerabilities
security team Postgres
itself.
назначает
So the
настоящую
Postgres
уязвимость. Но
security
прикол в том,
team
что не только
assigns
CVE
real
назначает
vulnerabilities. But the
уязвимости.
problem
Часто
is that
люди
it's not only
идут в
them.
другой CVE
Quite often,
numbering authority
people
и
go
заводят
to
там
another CV
уязвимости,
numbering
которые
authority
уязвимостями не
and
являются.
initiate a vulnerability which is not a vulnerability. Because of this, using the security scanners in order to understand if you have problems with the database or not, evoke quite a lot of noise, because people who have no relation to the security team, for some reason, generate vulnerabilities that are really not. So, a simple idea behind today's presentation: if the subsystem had vulnerabilities, it is defended. I'm not saying that systems that don't have vulnerabilities are not being defended, because it's difficult to prove in principle. It's difficult to prove that something does not exist that you don't deal with. But on the other hand, it's a problem that is based on the general opinion about hackers. And it's clear that we're kind of juggling with words, but nevertheless, the existence of vulnerabilities is the main attribute indicating that the system is being secured. For instance, if we have WAL compression, the thing that allows sending less data in replication to write less data on disk. If you can monitor the replication channel, you'll see bytes that seemingly don't speak about anything. But this is not exactly true. If you can change the packet size down to 1 byte, then in 4,000 checkpoints, you'll be able to retrieve the super user cache from the database. If certain conditions apply. So theoretically, it's possible. And it's not a vulnerability, because you can't do anything about that. On the whole, compression of these users next to sensitive data always wins encryption in any system. So this is just part of the attack surface. You can guess the data byte by byte and consider the size of the compressed package to see if your guess was good or not. And being able to change a password, it's a privilege that most users have. So it's a good example of the fact that the subsystem may be enabled exclusively by the system administrator, and it doesn't contain vulnerability, because things like that are not a vulnerability. Let's take an example of a different sort. In 2020, we had a problem with the interaction of the search path attribute. Let's come to the exploit. An unprivileged user can create a system, a function in the system catalog, in the system directory, that can acquire super user privileges through some light hacking. One would think that it's an incredible vulnerability if you have logical replication. The fact that the user can just create an object that looks like a system object is becoming a super user. But the thing is that such things are easy to search for and fix. The patches looks quite simple. The thing that accepts logical changes after the connection with the database resets so as only to accept catalog contained things. And as a result of people finding this vulnerability, documentation was extended so that people should understand that the publisher of logical replication operates under the super user and has access to the entirety of data. If you can substitute for the table from which a replication is happening, you can get the super user privileges. So this potential problem, this security model has been changed by almost all cloud providers because they understand that logical replication should not only be used by super users. Of course, if you use ODS or managed Postgres, logical replication will be run by specialized roles. In fact, what kind of conclusion do we have to make from this vulnerability? Our database offers an opportunity to configure it in such a way so that non-privileged users could create objects in the public sphere. And this capability is being protected. So we have vulnerabilities that have used this capability. This capability has not been revoked. The point is that the documentation as a whole allows that, and it's considered to be safe practice. If you want to look at some interesting source of similar ideas, I would like to recommend you an article by, I think, Jeff Davis, entitled Surprising Behavior of Roles Privileges. There are a lot of things of that kind. There are more than 4 that are listed here. And one would wish that you understand them when you start writing code on PostgreSQL. Briefly, I would like to explain to the beginners in writing code in PostgreSQL. When you compile an executable file, you can compile libraries there. You can dynamically connect to them during execution. If you're building some Python script, it connects to the files that are stored in the file system. So the function POPG SQL connect to those objects. They're used as database snapshots. In the current snapshot, they're trying to define what table you have called, or to see what table you have called, what triggers you have used. And they're trying to do that using variables of the search path type. So when you're writing code, it's important to understand which requests, which calls can be substituted for. If you write fully qualified, the task becomes much more difficult to solve. But in connection with all those things that I've said, I would like to say that the ability to grant ownership is equal to, presenting them the owning role. So you have a table where you can define triggers, functions, some view. If you are able to pass this table from someone to own, or somebody takes this table from you, you're getting the privileges. Quite often, people who patch databases create a special role that's required to pass a table from one user to the other. For instance, an employee has resigned, and they have a schema from which a table must be, passed to another service. Within these tables, there can be anything. There can be backdoors.
Если вы передали таблицу суперпользователю, вы передали
employee to delete the entire database, and everything available to the system user under which the database process is executed will be available to them. This is not a vulnerability. It's part of the contract with the developers, with the database developers. That's the way it's designed. Another example, which is quite often considered to be dangerous. Let's come back to the exploit that we considered before. We have a system function that's used in logical replication. It's considered in the context of read-only transactions. You can't just delete this alter. You can't become a super user in the read-only mode, but you can use copy. And copy is a typical way to conclude the attack. There's some injection, there's some zero-day to erase the privileges, and copy to steal everything or break everything or get into the operating system. So therefore, security people quite often ask to delete that copy. Why do you need did that. All the attacks happened this way. Copy as such is quite a harmless thing that's only available to super users. It's a cherry on the pie. But the problem is that the user that's not part of the low list is already there. So the problem is not how they get into the operating system. So copy as such is quite harmless, and some Postgres-based databases needed for normal life. Second Plum can't live without copy.
Так вот,
So
еще там пример был.
there was another example.
Нет, не пример. Простая идея.
No, it's not an example, just an idea.
Разработчиков базы данных
Quite often, they ask of database user a kind of super user for service purposes, but so that they shouldn't be looking into the data. It's almost a super user, but that they should do what being,
пользователь становится просто пользователем и ничего больше не может.
what's being allowed to them. It is an absolutely useless
То, что называется,
way to go, but also very dangerous. It's like a rabbit hole.
который
You change the security model
глаза в мире.
from the one
Меняем правила,
where all eyes in the world look at.
по которым
We're changing the rules
базу все хакеры ванильные.
by which all hackers in the world are trying to hack
Определяем контекст
the
безопасности
databases.
пользователя.
So if we redefine
Будут найдены в
the
ванильном Postgres.
super user security model, we'll be creating new threats. It's a dangerous thing.
Вот, например, функция, которая
Take, for instance, the function that can seem
на самом деле она
harmless, but in fact, it offers your database for breaking. So there's a function that returns A or B.
создать функцию,
So
может непривилегированный пользователь.
the super user
Нарушает требования
did
RLS.
proof the only thing that a super user can do. Normal users can't do that. And I think any creative hacker can
Я думаю, что при желании хакер сможет ее эксплуатировать и для
can exploit it
суперпользователя,
to get privileges of a super user.
который дано суперпользователю.
So what it's all about? We have a right given to a super user to mark a function as leak-proof.
Зависит
What does it mean, leak-proof? It doesn't have side effects. Its only result is that it returns. What's bad about this function? It can divide by zero.
может поделить на 0
It can divide by zero outside of the security context. So the attacker can learn that it has been called with zero, but for the data that they can't see. And over the zero, you can steal almost anything that you want from the database. So we've allowed the user to make functions leak-proof.
последствий.
And this can be escalated towards very serious consequences. Quite often, they ask you a role of the administrator for system copying, system backup, and to tune database.
Довольно тривиально от
It's quite trivial
тестирования перейти
to go from backup to super user privileges by just, for instance, changing the archive command. This is an example I've taken out of my head, and there are thousands of that. There are ways to go from backup to full control
базу данных. Давайте скажем,
of a user
виртуальные машины.
that executes the database. Let's put it this way, all virtual machines. So the number of such ways is infinite. Another important thing, database logs. It's understood that quite often they contain sensitive information. We've enabled logging of all requests, and we've seen how a user changes their password. On the whole, the logs
Чувствительная информация.
can be
Но при этом
cleansed of the system-sensitive information. But you also need to understand that logs contain potentially everything that the database has. So getting super user privilege via logs will be difficult if they're cleansed. But nevertheless, the information can always trickle there. Just like
база данных и бэкап
the database state or database backups, and they need to be protected with all those mechanisms that
должны заниматься и логами. Нельзя просто так отправить в защищенное место.
you make against hackers. And if you go further to those places where you don't quite understand how the responsibility is split, it might make sense to talk about errors. Errors that return the database in a general case should not contain information that the user is not entitled to see, but it's important what kind of user. It's a database user rather than application user. If you've seen a line that belongs to a different database user, it's a vulnerability. Report it to the Postgres work, and it'll be fixed in the closest release. If you run into some contradiction with some key, and you send this error to the user, not the database user, but the user of your application, then potentially they'll be able to see everything that you would want to hide from them. Another part, all kinds of checks, for instance, with the help of AmpCheck. Vulnerabilities are encountered there quite often. The integrity problem, by default, is not granted to other users than super users. So these rights, the rights for these checks are revoked. But nevertheless, this feature is safe in the sense that it doesn't pass its context, which means that you don't pass vulnerabilities that will further allow exploiting it all the way to passing the rights to the user. Now this has been patched, and you see that it's not about some ancient time, like 10 years ago. Vulnerabilities like that are being found quite often, and every new release coming out every 3 months has fixes for those. The next database security aspect is about depleted resources. Quite often, they ask us to make it so that the user couldn't put the database out of memory, or so the user couldn't get all the connects. They're also asking us that we shouldn't allow them to do code dumps, but these are bugs that are hard to be classified as a vulnerability. But core dumps do often result in the capability to run arbitrary code. So it's very difficult to constrain the utilization of resources in the database. So a bad guy will find a way to extend the scope, occupy some lock. So in the Postgres security model, isolating a user from resource consumption is a very difficult thing to do. On the other hand, in the Postgres security model, if you have the minimum privileges principle enacted, you will probably be able to limit access to the data. So the data will not be stolen from you or not encoded. One of the cases when an error in the code was not a vulnerability. The request cancellation package allowed allocating more memory than your application needed, the cancel request. But in the case of this cancellation, this package could not allocate more than 30 kilobytes because it's limited with the memory context. So as a result, they failed to bring it to the out-of-memory state. That was me reporting to security, and it wasn't acknowledged as a vulnerability. All it resulted was that memory consumption was a bit higher. One other thing I'd like to talk about happened recently.
казначейство США
They actually hacked the US Treasury. The essence of the vulnerability, quite unexpectedly, consisted in the incorrect work of parameter escaping in the console utilities. One would think that console utilities that come in the box with Postgres are the tools that shouldn't be used as part of the technology stack on the way between the user and the data on the disk, on the hard drive. But nevertheless, it turned out that they were used in this case. And the security team, when considering this report, arrived at the conclusion that once we are providing the screening of parameters, we need to make it secure. So it was recognized as a vulnerability. And it was patched. The essence was bash script was calling PSQL and was passing some user parameters over PSQL. You could go out of the parameter escaping and pass the data about the user in the context of the SQL command. So that is basically all I wanted to talk about today. If something is only allowed to a super user, there's a reason behind that. It means that this privilege can offer an opportunity to gain access to all other super user privileges. A large number of super user functionality makes so that there are always a lot of places. Most think that the database should not be able to look into the internet. Of course, non-authenticated vulnerabilities exist very rarely in Postgres. And when I say very rarely, I mean I haven't seen one. But nevertheless, looking direct into the internet from the database is quite a bad idea. With this, I'm prepared to take your questions. Thank you. Andrei, thank you. Hey guys, questions? Please use the microphones. Hello, Alexei, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the CVE that you were showing as applied, as referred to 2020. So if there's a role on public and create, the echo is very high. Can you speak a bit slower, please? Okay, I'll try. The CVE that you were talking about, isn't that the object is being created in the public schema, and then it can be used. Let me come back, and we'll open the slide. Can I get my remote enabled? It only seems to be flipping forward. So, in Postgres, there are some default values. Search path, and that includes the public schema and the rights, the privileges of the public role to create an object in the public schema. Let me just come to you, because this way I just can't hear you, can't understand what you're saying. I'm sorry. Yeah. This thing goes back quite a long time, back. In the documentation, there's a disclaimer to this effect, and it has been reported. So, isn't there a desire to reformat this old legacy, to remove such things from the search path, and that includes the right of creating objects? That would remove all those vulnerabilities. Well, that's a great idea. But the main thing about Postgres is that it has no problems. It's just like, we are not going to break your application. But there are still people who live for 9.3 or 8.4. new versions should be as compatible to what exists, so that people shouldn't be afraid of any new problems. I have quite a long list of things that we have been supporting for 20 years. And search path is not at the top position among them. That's about security, but still, we have support for heap moved in and heap moved off, which were reported in 7.0. And there are, before these lines, there have been thousands of lines that nobody has exploited. But if you upgrade it from 74 and all the way forward, you may run into such problems. And we're not requiring of you to scan the entire database. So the general idea is that the volume should not depend on the volume of data that you have. So I think search path is there forever. Yes, Agila. Clear text password. It's always there. It's forever. So I've heard a lot of times a suggestion that let's ban clear text and password, and people would immediately come back to you. That's my favorite way. I always do that. So clear text password. Everything that was released by Postgres will continue to run for at least a decade. Rust Connect, Trust, Trust is something that we value. That's a good question. Why don't we ban something? Security people love banning things, but unfortunately not. We're going to keep supporting everything. Hello, hello, can you hear me? Or will you come to you? No, keep going. I mean, I can hear you quite well from here. Hello, hi.
Такой вопрос.
A question. Can you briefly share perhaps the most difficult or complicated contributes that you've done, and also maybe some advice as to how to start contributing? Well, basically, that's not the question to the topic, but I'm not a security person. But we have time. Yes, we have time. It's a great question. Two great questions, actually. Firstly, how to start contributing. You need to exploit the database, find a problem, and solve it. Don't solve somebody else's problem. If something doesn't work in your body, then it's always clearer when you start explaining them. If you don't have problems of your own, well, find problems with some other user. You can find a source of problems. You can find any DBA. If they you carry a badge saying DBA, you can ask, what's happening with PostgreSQL? He says, everything needs to be overhauled. In Postgres, there's a to-do list. And there's a not to-do list. People are looking it up, and only really hardcore things stay there, changing which would be a real pain. Well, actually, there are a lot of things that seems to be very minor, are really important. Things that you are nice to do, but it's somehow problems. Take, for example, the AMP check, the thing that corrects the integrity of the database. It is not yet able to parallelize the verification. It's just a single thread. It said, we're in 2025, we run machines with thousands of processor cores, and it's a one single thread thing. It can be done, but people don't do it. My longest patch was, I was committed for 5 years. We had an incident with the SRU, proposed a solution that we spent a lot of time discussing, and then everything just went down. So unfortunately, yes, because we need to maintain all the millions of installations that exist out there, you have to spend a lot of time discussing even minor changes. And another thing, we have Hacker Discord,
Роберт Хаас временами проводит воркшопы. Типа, а давайте поговорим
and
про
Robert Haas
статистики.
runs workshops there from time to time. Let's talk about the statistics system. And the authors of the system come back and they start complaining, this one doesn't seem perfectly, that one. Actually, the problem is always more difficult than it seems, but it doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile to address it. The other thing you have to understand, that sometimes you have to spend a lot of time doing that.
Чем это стало моей профессией,
Well, before this became my profession, I spent about 2 years contributing, something like that. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your question. You can ask more questions while you have this opportunity, guys. Look, can you tell me, you offered so many excellent examples. Do you run some continuous audits to identify real requests or valuable requests for database change?
Слушай, я, наверное, про системы безопасников рассказывать не буду.
Look, I'm not going to speak about the security changes it's done by SIB. I can speak about database and standard approaches. This is my responsibility. Take, for instance, super users. If somebody has, got super user privileges and hacked you, come to us. We have quite a good monitoring of data integrity. We check for error codes. We're monitoring for error codes related to the data integrity.
Ну, это, пожалуй, все, что вот такого.
And that perhaps is everything that comes to my mind regarding database, and that is not about Yannick's bot. Okay, guys, if there are no more questions, once, twice, going. Best questions. Deprecated search path or to do with Postgres. I think it's about doing Postgres. This is something that should be awarded a prize for. So come to us, and thank you for the question. And you're getting the second book.
От издательства «Питер».
From Peter. Thank you for your questions.